The DPRK is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. However, it's anything but democratic or a republic or really for its people. If you don't know which nation this is, most of us know it as North Korea. It is easily recognized as the most secretive sovereign nation in the world, likened to an enigma wrapped in mystery, around the clock covering up corruption. This nation is isolated on a degree unlike anything we've ever seen before. Only in recent years are citizens of non-communist countries allowed to travel there. And even with that burden lifted, traveling to North Korea is a tight and sometimes quite unstable process. Even if you have acquired a visa to travel there, you are watched closely by the government, escorted almost everywhere by a tour guide, must ask permission to record or photograph anything, must not in any way show disrespect or show any form of disdain for the country's leaders, and you are prohibited from going anywhere outside of North Korea's capital city, Pyongyang, unless you go to one of the few sites available for international tourists to stay, such as the Masikrong ski resort and other places that are quote-unquote free. As I've already stated, North Korea is a truly different place. When entering into the borders of a country, tourists face the stark reality that whatever they see, and whatever they experience, and whatever they do, is at the most fundamental level a movie set, a state-controlled life propaganda city, and they are all a part of it. All of this is done in an attempt to disguise and direct attention away from the dark secrets of the nation. Far away from these tourist-designated areas, and just escaping the all-seeing eye of the media, is the real North Korea. Millions of people live in poverty, poor, starved of food and natural resources needed for survival. Thousands of North Koreans that are spread out across the country are so isolated from the outside world that many probably are not aware of the existence of the internet. Well, this is a communist country that takes every move it can to brainwash its citizens into believing what it wants them to believe. If any citizen sees through the propaganda and attempts to show any resistance to the government, they are put into concentration camps for hard labor. Over 120,000 people are in North Korea's gulag system. To make matters even worse for those to resist or show opposition to the government, there is a practice known as 3 generations punishment, whereby the resistor's child and grandchild will be subject to life in these hard labor camps. That means there are people that are in these labor camps for the crimes of their grandfather or grandmother. We can go on and on about this rogue yet sovereign nation. Since we have already analyzed the current state of North Korea, only one thing remains. How did North Korea become North Korea? It all began in the heart of the Cold War, when the United States was in nuclear standoff with the Soviet Union. While on the surface, the Cold War seems to be just a war dealing with international affairs between leaders, ideologies, and representatives of the nations, the basis of the Cold War was based on the spread and recession of communism. The Soviet Union was succeeding in its mission to rapidly spread communism across the world, while the US was trying to stop it. Of course, with these two nations being the two powerhouse countries of the world, if both of them were to ever get into a war, it would probably not take long for the nuclear capabilities of each country to be revealed, which would result in the destruction or mass reduction of human life on Earth. But both countries retaliated to the option of nuclear warfare. Of course, the Soviet Union was still succeeding at its mission to spread communism, so the United States had to find a way to stop it without resorting to nuclear warfare. What they did was send their troops and weaponry reinforcements to pro-democratic or rebel groups that fought against the spread of communism. In turn, both countries engaged in proxy wars, simply the act of engaging in war without the major country getting involved in the opposing major country. To dumb it all down, the Cold War, which is the big war, was fought by engaging in little wars that would in turn have a large impact on the outcome of the war. Some of these proxy wars turned out to be big wins for the United States and for democracy as a whole. However, some of these attempts at stopping communism led the United States to opening a floodgate of new problems that will come to haunt it in its years beyond the current war. Not only does this include North Korea, but it also includes the war on terror, Al-Qaeda, and many other things that will be covered in another video. Now, back to the point. The Cold War was fought in proxy wars. As many will know, the Great War before that war was World War II. One of the Axis powers, Japan, was forced to give up land to some countries that it had surrendered to. Before Japan surrendered, it owned the Korean Peninsula. But now it had given the North to the Soviet Union and the South was taken by the USA. Since the North was owned by a communist regime and the South by a democratic nation, both of the countries fought over complete ownership of the peninsula. Documenting the fluctuation of territory ownership between two countries would take up too much time since the quote-unquote border changed so much. Basically, both sides fought, and no matter how much one side would get pushed back, both would regain the lost territory. This happened over and over and over and over and over again. During this time, the UN drew a border line across the Korean Peninsula in an attempt to stop both sides from warring against each other. Of course, this failed, and the communist North continued to quarrel with the South. Then, in July of 1948, Syngman Rhee was elected to become the first president of what was soon to become South Korea. On August 15, 1948, Syngman Rhee declared South Korea an independent nation. Seeing this take place, the Soviet Union did the same. They selected Kim Il-sung to be the first leader of North Korea, a nation founded 1 month after South Korea on September 9th. Finally, in July of 1953, both countries called for a ceasefire, more properly known as the Korean Armistice Agreement. This decision between both of the countries entails that they will establish a border between each other, thus creating a temporary truce until both sides can come to an agreement to unite Korea once again. What's interesting about this agreement is that it never entails that the war has ended. In fact, the war is still going on today. It's just, well, halted. So now, we are getting closer to present-day North Korea. Both countries have been established as independent and have somehow been able to stand each other enough to join the United Nations in 1991. 1991 was also the same year the Cold War ended, as well as the same year the Soviet Union dissolved. This was when North Korea started to take a turn for the worst. For the entire time during the Cold War, North Korea was actually much better off than South Korea. How could this be? Well, North Korea had the communist Soviet Union, one of the biggest powerhouses of a country to exist at the time, on its side, supplying it with military reinforcements and resources needed to keep the well-being of the country in good condition. When the South became a sovereign nation, they were left to their own when it came to making the nation better, since not long after they declared themselves a nation, most of the US forces developed there just said farewell, leaving the South to fare for themselves. But with the dissolving of the Soviet Union, North Korea's only real source for trade at the time, they plummeted fast with no greater regime to catch them from completely running themselves into the ground. After the death of Kim Il-sung, the next leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-il, took power. Seeing how fast the nation was falling from its former prosperous glory, he knew something had to be done. The North Korean government began to create tighter laws, restrict outsiders from the nation, and push the propaganda machine into overdrive. The basic messages of this propaganda was that North Korea, or the DPRK, was in war against the outside world, and everyone on the outside envied their prosperity. In order for the North Korean populace to believe this, they had to strip almost every citizen of what little human rights they had. Only the elites and rich of North Korea have the right to travel abroad and live in the good and lavish North Korea that the international tourists are allowed to see. During the leadership of Kim Jong-il, more and more restrictions were being put in place, and transparency that the already mysterious nation had to the eye of the world was now completely eclipsed. All foreign journalists were forbidden. Despite the immense secrecy shadowing the nation, however, news of its rapidly accelerating nuclear program spread internationally. Through most of Kim Jong-il's reign over North Korea, he continued to enhance the quality of weaponry and further turned the nation over to militaristic values. When he passed away, Kim Jong-un took power. Sometime into his reign over the nation, he loosened up some restrictions on journalists, gave permission for Americans and citizens of non-communist countries to travel there, and granted the outside world a small peephole view into the country. Then, after almost a decade of continuous research into nuclear weapons, on July 4, 2017, North Korea successfully launched their first intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM. This added to the already high tension with North Korea after the death of American tourist Otto Warmbier that just happened 1 month earlier. After roughly 4 years of silence during Obama's strategic patience with North Korea, threats of nuclear war with the United States from Kim Jong-un were, for the most part, ignored, since they were not yet backed up by the weaponry capabilities to perform an attack. However, the game has changed. The North has been revving up tensions with the United States and its allies by making threats and testing new ICBMs that could possibly hit the mainland US if the missile was not properly intercepted by a missile from our own defense systems. There have also been theories of an EMP attack by the regime that could possibly knock out power throughout much of the United States, leaving many parts of the country defenseless against an attack. With an unpredictable man in charge of the rogue nation, something has to be done. But there isn't really much of an easy solution when it comes to North Korea. Was a solution, we would have found it by now. Strategic patience didn't work, sanctions didn't work, and an assassination attempt would cause the nation to fall into itself, become a dangerous and unstable war zone, or even create a civil war between the resistance and the citizens who believe all of the propaganda. In fact, performing an assassination attempt on any foreign leader, including dictators like Kim Jong-un, would violate foreign policy set forth by Gerald Ford during his presidency, whereby no employee of the United States government shall engage in or conspire to engage in political assassination. It would also violate Executive Order 12333, signed by President Ronald Reagan in 1981, which further solidifies the policy set forth by Gerald Ford many years before. In this nobody-wins stalemate situation the powers of the Western world have with North Korea, President Trump is taking a different approach to the issue. If the president can somehow convince China to cut off all relations and trade with North Korea, it would have the same effect as to when the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991. When the only source of sustenance for a nation is restrained, it won't take long for it to fall or surrender. But even if China was cooperating with the United States, North Korea could possibly rely on its government system, Juche, which means self-reliance. While the masses of the nation are impoverished, the country actually sits on an estimated $10 trillion worth of minerals. So if all sources of trade and sustenance for the nation are cut off, it wouldn't be too far-fetched to assume they would try to pull something off. From its very beginning, North Korea has always been a secretive, rogue nation. Its current identity and ideologies were passed down from the nation that helped raise it up, from corruption to corruption to corruption. Only time will tell which direction this current international crisis goes. We can only hope and pray for those imprisoned and oppressed in North Korea, that hopefully one day the world will see an end to one of the longest ongoing wars in history, and Korea will finally be unified. But until that day comes, now you know how North Korea became North Korea.